I'm a homeschool dad and I'm a widower. My wife passed away 3 years ago, and that really forced my hand to get into my own children's education. My 11-year-old just said, like, I want to read over the summer. They are just forcing the books. Every section is just LGBTQ everything. She pulls off a book called Queer Ducks. Well, there is a naked woman, and I went into the office and I said, hey, well, what's going on? Why is that out there? The fight for them to take that down. They accused me of wanting to suppress art.
Are you interested in innovation in Christian education? Did you know that there are churches who are waking up to their role in offering K-12 education? They are doing so by opening their doors to offer creative Christian learning environments, providing low-cost, simplified private school options. Many of these learning environments, such as microschools and hybrid schools, offer support to the homeschool community while offering an escape route for students who've been trapped in the public schools and want a way out. Pastors everywhere are realizing that it is time to activate their church and assume their rightful place in discipling our children in the Lord, not just on Sunday mornings, but Monday through Friday. They are opening their doors and starting unique schools. It is wise to do so. Otherwise, what are we doing? For far too long, Christians have relied on the government to educate our children. This ought not be. We can do better, church, and I can show you how. Wise and Otherwise highlights the successful church and school partnerships. We will learn from pastors who are getting it done and school founders who are on a mission to expand the kingdom of God through K-12 education. Come on, let's enter the arena of K-12 education and redeem it for the glory of God. Hello, today I have with me Justin Walker. He is from LaGrange, Kentucky. He is a pastor there at Salt and Light Church. He's doing amazing things. He is a man of conviction who acts on his convictions, and he has started a school, and not just any school. I can't wait to tell you more about it, but he has actually started a tuition-free school that operates as a ministry of their church. So Justin, thanks so much for being here today. Tell me a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. I know you've been busy. I know you've been having lots of interviews.
Yes.
I learned about you from an article. I think it was CDN did this article. And then you mentioned you've just got lots of people calling up and wanting to hear more about your story. Please take about 5 minutes and give us a little background and intro. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a homeschool dad, and I'm a widower. My wife passed away 3 years ago, and that really forced my hand to get into my own children's education. We were homeschooling. I have 6 children. 5 of them were at home, and they were spanning from 4th grade through 12th grade. And so I just had the whole gamut. I had to figure out how to graduate a child and curriculum. And my wife was doing this really great curriculum that she had piecemealed together. And then when I tried to come in on that, that was rough. And so, I was getting into education on that end of things. And if you put the timeline on that, we're in 2024. This was like right at the first of 21 when my wife passed away. So we had just come out of COVID, lots of craziness happening there. And so for me personally, there was a journey that just started with like getting into my own kids' education, getting into understanding what was happening with their schooling, but then also like trying to further that. And so just a starting point for me was that there was a group of ladies at our church who had come to me and they had said, would you be interested in starting a school? And I politely told them that my wife was, at the first time they came to me, my wife was still with me. She was sick. And I was like, I've got a wife that is bedridden. I don't have time for this in my life. Like, no, politely, but no. And so then, they approached me again a second time, and then they approached me again a third time. So I've had these ladies come to me 3 times about starting a school at the church. Now they're talking about a tuition-based school, just a regular, what I would call like a regular private school. And simultaneously, my wife passed away, and I'm getting into the education of my children. So a marked moment in my mind was when I went to the library with my 11-year-old daughter. This is the public library. She came to me and she said, "Dad, I want to read a book." Well, I'm trying to get into homeschooling, and my 11-year-old just said, like, "I want to read over the summer." Win, right? Like that's a dad win. And so I'm like, yes, let's go. And so we go up to the public library, and they are just forcing books on. This is right at the 1st of June, and every section is just LGBTQ everything. And I tried to like look past it and just go find the material that we would want, but it was like it wasn't even existent there. And we asked the librarian, and she comes over in front of me. Like I'm here, my daughter's beside me, and she's pulling books off the shelf, handing them to my daughter. One of those books that she handed, we went in and said, we have an 11-year-old. She wants to read some classics. She wants to read something interesting. And she pulls off the shelf, she pulls off a book called Queer Ducks and puts them up in my daughter's hands. And I was like, whoa, I don't, I'm checking that. I was like, we don't want that. We put it back. And so this went on for 2 or 3 more books. And so finally I took a picture of the books. I made a post online. I was so mad at the library. I said, we won't be back. And just had the firestorm that came out of that. I mean, I still have some of them saved. People were losing their minds on me because I said I wouldn't go back to the library. And that was an eye-opening moment for me to kind of realize like kids are dealing with this, but it's a level that, it's beyond that level of like, oh, well, there's a kid in a school who maybe had to hear something that their family didn't agree with. Like talking about real problems that kids are facing every day. And that was like a moment that rooted in my mind to say, like, this is happening. My daughter
Yeah.
thankfully had me to protect her and say, no, well, we're not going to do that. But what are you going to do with all the kids that don't have that? And so that was a starting point, and we began to merge from that point, and we built the idea of First Principles Academy. So I'm saying the ladies from our founding team and myself, pastor of the church, began to talk through how we could have how we could have a school at our church. And this is where First
Yeah.
Principles was born. So
Okay. Well, I love that. It's always interesting to me to hear, kind of the story, the background, because there's always a story. Why did somebody get to this point? What's the Lord been doing in their hearts and in their family up until then? And as far as education, what was the original, what was the reason that you and your wife decided to homeschool, and why not public school?
sure. So I have a blended background of homeschooling and public school, so back and forth. We got married young, and it went to the courthouse and just got married. And so we didn't have any premarital counseling. Nobody helped us through any of that. So, we just talked through things. And I said, I would love to homeschool our kids. And she was like, no way. We're not homeschooling. We're putting them, I went to public school. I'm fine. And I'm like, well, I think there might be some more problems there. Well, so 18, we got married. 19, bought a house and started a business. Went to seminary. That was me. Well, I say seminary, but Bible college. And then 20, we took in our 2 daughters. So 20 years old, I
Okay.
have a 10-year-old and a 2-year-old. And
Wow.
our 10-year-old was in public school and in foster care in Kentucky. You have to have public school. I mean, you could do private school, but we couldn't afford that at 20 years old, or
Hmm.
even now for that matter. But
Hmm.
so we couldn't do private school. Public school was the only option. And then watching as our 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, she didn't get adopted until she was 15. And so for the next 5 years, she was forced at public school, and watching those things that were
Oh.
happening.
Mm.
We didn't want so then we have this 2-year-old. And so our 2-year-old is coming up, and my wife was just, well, I wanted homeschool from the beginning, but my wife was watching all the things happening to the 10, 11, 12-year-old. And then she's
Yeah.
going, but like, I don't want that for our kids. And of course, in the middle of that, we had 4 other children. So we ended up with 6 children. So there's this kind of like, what are we going to do when our kids, now she wants to homeschool our biological children. We have foster children who weren't adopted yet. Are we going to
Mm.
split them up? Are we going to adopt some or homeschool some and public school some? But thankfully, the adoption went through about the same time that all the kids were old enough to start school. And so we ended up homeschooling all of them all at once. But it kind of took her seeing
Right.
some of those older grades. And I think that happens to a lot of parents in public school. I think in the early years, they're
Yeah.
like, it's so sweet. Mrs. So-and-so is so great. We're in kindergarten, and they're learning to count, learning to read. And like, it seems very innocent and it seems sweet in the early years.
Hmm.
But then as you get into those older years, it's kind of like a flip. It's a reverse. And I just
Yeah.
remember
That's true.
one example that sticks out of my mind was we went into the local public high school with my daughter, so my oldest daughter, who had been through a lot of things, a lot of trauma. And we went into the um, Oldham County High School, and there on the wall they had from their art class, all the kids in art class had painted paintings, and they put them on the wall. Well, there is a naked woman, and I will not describe the pornographic image that was on the wall
Mm.
in painting form. And I went into the office and I said, hey, what is going on? Why is that out there? And they said, well, that's from the art class. And I'm like, I have a daughter who I can guarantee you does not want to see that. Like, that's
Wow.
gotta be a trigger. Why would you put that up? And
Yeah.
it's a fight for them to take that down, to get that picture taken down. And, they accused me of wanting to suppress art and,
Yep.
they did take it down, but that was just a moment that was, like, in my wife's and I's mind that was like, "This is the
Mhm.
stuff we're talking about." She came home from the
Mhm.
library one time, and she's got a book that they were reading, and it's about lesbian vampires. This is my daughter, like, I'm a pastor of a church, and my daughter's
Right.
got a book about
Yeah.
lesbian vampires, and it came from the school, so there you go,
Yeah.
there were some of the reasons.
Well, it's interesting. I was at a meeting a few days ago here in Kansas, and there was a gentleman there. He was a parent, he was a dad who ended up running for school board there. And he brought with him a book, and he had already, a couple bookmarks in there and was passing it around the table when we asked, what made you decide to run for school board? And he's like,
Mhm.
this. And he
Yeah,
handed me a book, and just turning and opening the page, you would not believe the vulgar, graphic, just horrible things that, I mean, you would believe it, I know.
right.
But it's true that that's there, and I can also relate though, so I do wanna speak to this, as far as not being able to afford traditional private school and families really feeling stuck in a situation where their only option is to send their kids to public school, and I think we want to believe and my husband and I have even, so we've homeschooled our kids for the majority of the time, but we've had 2 seasons where we have enrolled our kids in public school. One
Mhm.
was for kind of just this exploration into this new model where they were doing a micro school option.
Yeah,
And then a second time was something similar, but with online virtual school programming and feeling like this might be a solution for us. Like we can't afford to send all 6 of our kids to this private Christian school down the road as much as we would love to.
right.
And so I get that. Like I really feel the pressure that a lot of families, and obviously families in your community, you're meeting a need. So that's what I just think, God brings these situations in individuals' lives to encourage them to like open their eyes and give them that initial that motivation that they need. So what did it look like for you? So you mentioned there were 3 ladies who'd come, they wanted to start a school, it was going to be a traditional kind of like the business model, tuition based, and you felt very convicted and felt very strongly that this needed to be a ministry. And if it was a ministry, it was going to be free. Tell
Yeah.
me more about that.
Sure. So just to be clear, I think in anybody's minds that I've watched literally hundreds of people when I say tuition-free school, and their eyes drop, their mouth drops. They say, "How? How can you do that?" And one of the things I would always encourage in the beginning was to say, just swap the word tuition with donation.
Mm,
Instead of a tuition-based school, we're going to have a donation-based school. And an interesting factor to that was when I remember one day, I don't remember exactly who it was that I was talking to, but I was talking to somebody who had joined our team, and they were like, "How can anybody sustain? What entity can sustain this
mm.
large off of just donations?" And we were in the church, and I just like looked around. I was like, the
Yeah,
church, like the church for the
right.
last 2,000
Yes.
years, and there are
Yes.
lots of big churches. I think the statistic right now is that a large church is 1,000 people and a mega church is 2,000 people, and the average mega church pastor makes $350,000 a year as a salary. And so I say, if
Mm,
churches can afford to give
wow.
that type of money as a salary to a pastor, which I don't agree with that, that's a different topic. But my point would be, if they had that type of money to give that to a pastor, then what if we took that focus and shifted it to this
Mhm.
problem that we have in our schools? And
Yes.
so, you know, the moment that we start looking at tuition, so I'm, in the early days, I'm working with these moms, well, I say moms, but these uh, persons who want to start a school and people who want to stay at school. And the question is, how could we make this a tuition free? How could you do it and not charge tuition? And of course, our first things had to be, we had to get on the same page that if it's going to be ministry, then it needed to be available to everyone who would need it. Otherwise, we start to lose the sense of ministry. Because there's the question of like, well, why don't you just do scholarships? Schools have scholarships all the time. But the problem even with that is because you at some point you have to start saying, well, how are we going to give those scholarships? Well, we'll have to give it to this group of people, this group of, this demographic of people, if they make this much money per year, or if they live in this area, or if this is their ethnicity, or you have to come up with a means to say, we'll give it to them because, and so you start to lose the sense of ministry. An example I've been giving a lot that I think will help to paint the picture would be, imagine with me that I was on the board at a crisis pregnancy center. This is a real story. And we really did raise the money and got an ultrasound machine. We didn't have an ultrasound machine. So we were sending, young women would call, they were in crisis pregnancy and they were abortion minded, and we would send them to other facilities to go get ultrasounds. Well, we raised the money and we got in an ultrasound machine. So just imagine with me that we got this ultrasound machine in, and a young woman calls and she's abortion minded and she's in crisis pregnancy. And we said, please come in. We want to talk with you. And she came in. And then imagine with me that we said, now we would love to give you an ultrasound. When you hear your baby's heartbeat, it'll change your mind. And we want you to hear that baby's heartbeat. And she says, yes, I'll do it. Now just imagine with me that you take a piece of paper and you push it at her. Oh, sorry for that. You push it at her and you say that it's $1,500 for this ultrasound. And you could say every other place that does ultrasounds charges $1,500. If you were to go to the local hospital, they're $1,500. If you go to the local medical facility, they're $1,500. It's normal to charge $1,500 for an ultrasound, but you can imagine with me that the young woman in crisis pregnancy who was already abortion minded, when I push that piece of paper at her and say $1,500, there is now a roadblock. And somewhere in there, we've lost the sense of ministry. And now we have the sense of this, how we're thinking, how do we stay open? And there's also other factors as well, but these things are coming to play all at once. Is what we're looking at and saying, okay, we need to be tuition free so that the persons who need it the most can come and be a part of it. And it doesn't have to be like we dictated that and said, well, as long as you lived in this demographic of area, or as long as you were a church member with us, or one of those things to say you could come to our school, but that we would say we're open to all who would need it. Jesus said, freely you received, freely give.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard you say, I mean, it's nonsense. We wouldn't be charging on Sunday morning for people to
Right.
enter our doors and
Nope.
receive
No price.
ministry and to be, So I mean, I just love it, but it is a radical idea. Unfortunately, it's still radical. I believe and dream in this, like in the future, that this will no longer be the radical stance, but this will be the norm. That's incredible. I would love to see this. Do you feel like this model is something that can be replicated? Do you feel like other churches can do this?
Can and should. And so I want you to imagine with me, let's just stop for a moment and say, who else would? If the church is not going to take a stance here, if we begin to recognize the need and what's really happening. So whether we talk about books, those sorts of things, that's true, but it goes deeper than that. The second leading cause of death among 14 to 17-year-old boys in America, second leading cause of death, suicide. Where's the problem? I said that from the pulpit when we announced this. I said it shouldn't be any. Like there should be no leading cause of death among 14 to 17-year-olds. That's a higher rate than veterans that are committing suicide of 14 to 17-year-olds. Why? Why do we have so many teenagers wanting to end their life? What is happening? And now we come to, well, who has the hope for that? Where does hope come from? Of course, we know the answer is Christ. Like Christ Jesus is our hope. And so why wouldn't we see that he's the hope for? So not more counseling, not more medications, not more therapies, not more after-school programs, but Christ. He is the answer. We know that. We want to get that to them. That's the ministry side of it. And we know that there's a great need. The need is so great. There's 50 million American students, 50 million that are in public schools. That's a huge number. That's a mission field that's in our backyard. Jesus said that the harvest is plentiful. It's the workers that are few. And so that's a plentiful harvest that's right in our own backyard, people that would want this. And so, once you get your mind wrapped around that there's 50 million American students, and then you start to say, well, who's going to take care of that? So let's go through our minds. Who could do it? Is the YMCA? They've got facilities, or can we count on them? How about Elon Musk? He's got a lot of money. Can he do it? Mark Zuckerberg, is he going to help us? Warren Buffett, is he going to make schools for kids? No way. those guys, that amount of money, they do things with their money when it's tax write-offs. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people who have a heart for the need that we see of 50 million American students that are being indoctrinated with a mindset that says there is no God, there is no help, there's no one that's there for you. You can believe that, the school, at best, your school right now is telling your child, you can believe that if you want, but we have to teach you the
Mhm.
truth, right? That's what so they're pitting the truth against God when we know that God is the truth.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, that's a best case scenario of, they would say, well, you can believe that if you want, but we can't teach that. So when you begin to say, well, then who, now you come to the church and
Yeah.
you say, wait a second, who is the group that has enough money and enough facilities to actually make a dent and make an impact in our local
Mhm.
communities for these 50 million American students? There are
Right.
thousands and thousands of students right here in our county. We can't take them all in. If our vision, if I shared with you at another time in our interview, if I share with you our vision, our vision is a school for at least 1,500 students, 1,500 students on our property. That's what we're looking to do. But that's only phase 3, because phase 4 for us is to get other churches to do the same. But even if we were to get a school for 1,500 students, we don't get all the students in our area. We need this to be more than just our church. If our
Yeah.
view is 50 million American students, then now we have to see beyond, oh, well, we want to start our own church school. No, we want the norm. This is my vision. My view is this. I would love to see in 20 years that if you visited a church and you came in and they didn't have a school, you would go, you don't have a school? It would be it
Yes.
would be like going to a church and they don't have small groups or Sunday school
Right.
classes. That you
Right.
don't have a school here? Like, I thought that's what all churches did. Like, churches have schools. And
Yeah.
so, and I believe we can get there. I think that there's enough need, and there's enough people that want the fulfillment of this need, and the church has the ability to do it. They just haven't had their eyes on it. I was there. I didn't have
Mm.
my eyes on it. I wasn't looking in that area. When you said missions, I would have thought homeless. I would have thought those who were in poverty. I would have thought those in other countries, third world countries. I would not have thought the kid getting on the big yellow bus. But my vision, the Lord's given me new eyes for that, to see a new mission field. And so then I say, yes, the church has to be involved. So can every church do what we're doing? Well, I'm a bold guy. I don't know. I don't know that every church would have enough gumption to go through exactly what we're going through right now in this moment. But our goal, our hope, is to begin a foundation that we could help other churches to, when they go, how do you do that? How could that happen? We could say, here are some answers. And then
Yeah.
as more churches come along and more churches come along, you can have a conglomerate where it becomes like, again, I mean, there would be no church right now that would say, well, how do you have a praise team? I mean, how do you have professional level music on a weekly basis? And they're not playing the
Mhm.
exact same songs over and over, but yet we figure that out. And
Right.
so, so much that we already do. Why can't we put our focus on our kids' education?
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Wise and Otherwise. We'd like to ask you to take a minute and please rate and review our podcast so that others can learn more about us, and just to continue to show your support for this work that we're doing. It would mean so much. So please, if you're on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, take a minute and give us a good review. Thanks. Yeah. Yes. I love it. Now, if we can go I want to spend a few minutes on some of the logistics, the practicality of this, because I know a lot of people will have a hard time wrapping their heads around, what are you talking about? How can this happen? Are you paying your teachers?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're not like just coming in voluntarily. It's not just like people in your congregation have stepped up and no. So
Mm-mm.
they are getting paid.
Yep. So we set a goal. We set a big goal, because again, I'm that big personality. So February of this year in 24, we announced our school, and we launched September of this year. That's a huge endeavor. You have no idea the number of people, like professional teachers, and they're like, you can't do that. And I'm like, we can. And so, I mean, if Nehemiah can build the wall, everybody told him he couldn't get that wall built, but he did it. So, here we are building the plane on the runway. We set a goal to launch with K through 12, and we were going to go all 12 grades. We were going to have hired teachers for all 12 grades. Headmaster, we like the term school minister, so we're calling our headmaster school minister. So we have school minister, teachers, assistants for those teachers, administrators. We wanted the whole 9 yards. And so we shot for 12 grades, and we did not receive enough funding to launch all 12 grades. We needed to build out for all those classrooms. We have a big giant building, but they weren't built for classrooms, so we needed to do a build out. Well, we needed permits. So we've got funding, permits, and then teachers. Well, the problem for us became we announced it in February, and most of the teachers in our area, we had lots of applications, but the problem for them was, oh, you're launching this September. We're already under contract with this school. So we have a nice little list going already of teachers that would love to come teach with us, but they just can't move yet. So next year, I assume we'll have even more. We didn't get our permits. We're still waiting. I don't know exactly why we're waiting on the state. Well, I know this, that we went from local, the size of our building caused us to go from local planning and zoning to state level. And so whatever red tape is there, we're now waiting on state. And so then you have then the funding portion of that. We raised a very significant amount of money in my mind, but not enough for all 12 grades. For us to do 12 grades and the space that we had, we would have had room for 165 students in 12th grade, across 12 grades, well, 13 grades, including kindergarten. But we didn't have that would have taken $2 million, and we didn't have $2 million. Just to be clear, we started at zero. We did not have any money to put towards this. We fundraised every bit of it. So up to this date, if you're okay with me sharing, I'll share with you where we're at.
Please.
So up to this date, so this is currently September 27th. So from February, Super Bowl Sunday, until September 27th, we've raised a little over $200,000. So we don't have all of the funding for the entire year. So we're paying our teachers. We have 7 teachers. 6 of those teachers have certificates and degrees. Only 1 does not. In Kentucky, your teachers do not have to have that. We didn't have to have any of our teachers had to have a certificate or a degree, but we are blessed with that. They do. So several of our teachers do have certificates and degrees, and we are paying each of those teachers a salary, except the ones who have volunteered to forego salaries. There have been some who have said, I love this mission. I love this ministry. I don't need the money. I just want to help. But we're not trying to just do volunteer teachers, which I think is the question you're asking. And so we have enough money that we've raised, and because we didn't spend all our money on a build out because we didn't get the permits, we have enough money right now to hold us off about 6 months, which is where we still have fundraisers coming up. And there will have to be, because we'll have to raise money for the future. Now, I wouldn't let that cause any fear about sustainability, because what we are finding is that this thing is a snowball. And so the moment we announced it, hundreds of emails, hundreds of calls about students, plenty of calls about teachers to want to come. And what we found with the fundraising is that there's a whole lot of people who are looking at us and saying, you have nothing to show for it. You had no student. I mean, we had nothing. We had no students, no anything. We're just like, we're going to start this thing. And so we had a lot of people say, get down the road a little bit, in their own words, get down the road a little bit, and then we'll talk. And so, but we did a vision tour back in April. We did a vision tour. And so that was like, brought people in from the community, gave them a tour of the facility, drew up plans with an architect, said, this is what we want this facility to look like, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, phase 4. We had this whole lineup. We showed them all the vision, and we raised $65,000 in that one tour, just by simply letting people come in.
Great.
Cost us hardly anything, and we gave people a tour and said, this is what we're trying to show you. This is what we think. There's a lot of people that want this, and they want somebody to do this. I think there's a lot of people that want the church to do this. And my inbox is proof of that. There are a lot of people that want this. They just haven't had enough gumption to make it happen yet. But I think as they begin to see somebody that's done it, then they'll be more inclined to do it as well. And those donors will be more inclined the more they get used to the idea. Just one more thing. I don't mean to be long-winded, but I do want to share with you that I try to share with people that you got to get out of the mindset of, you don't want to lose sight of the forest for the tree. What I found is that people want to say to me, why should I pay for that student's education? No, hang on. We got that's just a tree. You need to look at the forest. The forest is 50 million American students. The forest is 14 to 17-year-olds whose second leading cause of death is suicide. Which, by the way, that came from the CDC's website. That wasn't just a made-up statistic. And so, the forest that's in front of us is churches that are empty all week long that could be involved. That's the forest. Like, you're giving to the whole. If you start looking at it and going, well, if I give that amount of money, then I put that kid through school, why should I put him through school? Why don't I give to my own kids or something? You're losing
Mhm.
sight of the big picture.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay. So you mentioned that you could see pastors doing this everywhere and that that's a
Yep.
long-term 20-year vision. This is like going to be the norm. What would
So,
be your message speaking directly to pastors? How can they take that first step?
sure. So I would say two things. The first one is this: we're in ministry, and ministry is messy. And so, if you are worried, what I have found is the concern of they're going to tear up the facility. They're going to, if we open up our church, they're going to, we spent $40,000 on this carpet. Okay, great. But ministry is messy, and the people that are, there's also the fear of, like, if you open to the public, do you just end up with more public schools? And the answer is of course no, because we're offering them Christ. Here's a shocking thing about our school. We're not insisting. Our school does not make you sign a statement of faith that your child believes this. Our statement of faith says this is what we're teaching your child. It's the other way. Our teachers are
Yeah.
the missionaries. And so I am just foolish enough to believe God's word that Jesus transforms lives. And so even at the youngest of ages, those who don't know Christ can be transformed by getting to know him. And we're going to put him into our children's education. So one would be this, like, you're just going to have to step out of the mindset that we can keep our pristine building and everything gets to look perfect. It's going to be a little messy. The kids that are going to come in are going to have problems. Yes, you have things to deal with. You signed up for that. That's ministry. You ask me, like, what would I say to pastors? Pastors, you know this. When you first go to church, you see everybody's Sunday best. But then once you're in church and you get in ministry, you only see worse, right? Like the first time you go to a church, you see everybody's best. But then as you get in whatever ministries, you see worse and worse and worse. When you get into this level of ministry, pastoring or starting a school, you get to see the harshest, like the worst of the worst. You get to see the ugly side of people. But you pastors know that. So you knew you signed up for this. You knew that that's what was coming. This is what we do. We deal with messes all day long. And so why would this have to be any different? If it's not this mess, it's just going to be marriage counseling or some other mess. It's going to be some other thing. The second thing that I would tell you about, like, pastors, the idea of pastors getting involved would be this. The majority of churches in the United States are small churches. So more than likely, if you have a pastor watching this right now, he pastors a small church, which means under 150. So you have a church of under 150, probably even under 100. So you have under 100 people coming to your church on a regular basis, which means that you have statistically a youth group of probably, let's say, 10 kids, maybe 15. If you got a really strong youth group, maybe you got 20, you got a church of 120 of those are kids. And so if I looked at you today and I said, hey, we could do something at your church and we could draw 100 kids this week to your church, would you want that? And if your answer is yes, then I look at you and say, what if I could get you 100 kids 5 days a week for 8 hours a day, and you could pour Christ into them every day for 8 hours a day? Because that's what our schools are indoctrinating our children, because they have them 8 hours a day and they're force feeding them 8 hours a day. Well, you can believe in God if you want, but evidence says that the world that we evolved. 8 hours a day, they're being told, well, mathematics is a fact. I mean, it has nothing to do. They're not taught that mathematics is God's beautiful part of his creation. Like the wonders of his creation are all mixed up in numbers. And they're not shown anything of that. They're just told, well, these are facts, and your religion is something that you can believe if you want. But we could now take 8 hours a day. We pastors and churches could take 8 hours a day and pour Christ into math, English, history. Let's talk about history. You really want to show God, like, look at history. You can see God moving when you look at history. God told Israel over and over, remember, remember, remember. So, pour Christ into history. I don't mean to go on so long, but I think you get the idea. You could have 100 kids in your church 5 days a week. I think you would want, if you think of it from those terms, you would want that.
Yeah.
Any true pastor, any true minister who really wants to minister to the needs of the people, you would want that. And so maybe your church can't do K through 12. That's a big vision. Maybe you don't have land. We've got land with our building. So, we're looking at putting a building on our land. Maybe you don't have that. And so you say, I can't expand the facility. We're limited. Well, that's okay. Crazy idea. Christ said that they would know we're his disciples by the way that we love each other. So wouldn't it be a great idea if Church A and Church B partnered, and they said, I can do elementary in our school, in our church, and another church that I can do middle, and another church that I could do high. And then you had elementary and middle and high on a conglomerate of 3 churches. I mean, if you're like us, you're in Kansas, so you're in the Bible Belt as well. There's a church on every corner. So
Right.
what if those churches would link arms and partner together to go after this mission field that's in our own backyard and work together? And so, yeah, there you go. I would say
It's
pastors
so
know what
great.
to do.
It's so great. Yes. And I'm just curious, do you have other churches and pastors in your area who are behind you and supporting and,
Um,
rallying with you in this effort?
so the answer is currently no, but I don't want to say that to anybody's, I don't want to say that's anybody's fault. I think, there's a big question mark in everybody's mind right now is, did we want to pour money into something that maybe wasn't going to work, or pour resources into something that's not going to work? So we understand. We get it. They need to see some track record. I can say that we have several churches that are very interested in what we're doing. And
Mhm.
so we would love to see that, maybe in the initial, maybe there could be some help in funding, but more than that, what we really want more than any sort of help with funding would be that churches would say, we want to do what you're doing. And
Yes.
can you help us to get there? Can you show us what you did to get to the point that you're at? And so, with that being said, we have lots of churches, not necessarily in our area, but lots of churches that are reaching out to us and saying that they want to do what we're doing. We know of a church in
Great.
Florida, right now, church in Florida, who has already brought it before their elders, voted on it, and they're planning on starting their school next September. And that was
That's
based
great.
on they found out about us. They knew what we were doing.
Mhm.
We also know of a church in Georgia that did the same. And I just got an email 2 days ago, Wednesday evening. I got an email on my way to church, and there is a private school that started in 2020. They heard the interview that I did on CBN, and they sent me an email. They want to take their tuition-based private school and they want to take it to tuition free to
Wow.
open it to the public. And so we're already seeing that inspiration happening. That would be another encouragement to pastors as well. I think the thought of like, our facilities are going to get messed up or we're bringing in a whole bunch of problems. I can get that. But boy, that sure does get outweighed when you start to see the how much like people really want this. Our church is seeing blessings from this. I mean, we have people that send in money, people that pray for us. Right now, we're fasting and praying for our school and for our building fund to do all these build outs and to make the funding happening. I'm telling you, we have messages coming in all day long, every day of people across the country that are praying for us. And fast,
Mhm.
I've got people saying, we're fasting
Great.
with you. We're fasting today.
That's
Like,
great.
what a wonderful thing to
Yeah.
see the body of Christ coming together. So there's a
Yes.
grand need and people are really getting involved in that.
Yes, absolutely. And I love this because my goal with the HERO project, again, HERO stands for Heartland Education Reformation Organization. And the goal is to activate the church in
Yeah.
rallying behind and getting on board with Christian education and how we can be innovative, how churches can be creative. And the invitation is that they can get involved in one of 3 ways. You're involved in all 3 ways. I love it. The first option is you open your doors and you allow a school to come. You host a school there on your campus. The second option, if you can't do the first one, second option is that you get behind and you sponsor an existing Christian school in your community. And the third
Mhm.
option is to provide scholarships or help with funding. Fund these students so that they can come, whether it be through scholarships or just pure donations. So I love that. I love to see what you're doing. And just thank you so much for your obedience. Thank you for your conviction and acting on that. And I know it's going to encourage other pastors listening.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that very much, and thanks for having me on to share a little with your audience.
Yeah.
What's happening there, and if I could just, I want to add one other thing, which is
Hmm.
what we're doing on Fridays. We have a really cool thing happening where we've offered these Flex Fridays. We want to get our parents and our students together again. Parent-student relations is really
Hmm.
important, and so our school does not insist on students coming on Friday. Friday is a flex day and we're using that for tutoring and extracurricular things beyond the regular curriculum. But one of the goals that we have and we're working towards is working with the local homeschool community as well to offer help from our school and our resources to those homeschool parents.
That's so
So this
great.
does not have to be an us and them against homeschoolers. It's not. This can be a
No.
partnership with your homeschool community
Yes.
where those parents who maybe they need help with math or biology or something, and you've got resources in your church now to help with that. So you're not
Mhm.
just opening up the doors to those who are coming out of public school or those who need another source but can't afford private school, but you can also integrate this. You had mentioned a moment ago, like getting creative. You can
Mhm.
integrate this with your local homeschool community as well. And again, I can tell you that as those opportunities and those resources are available, you probably know this. Lots of homeschool
Yes.
parents are looking for plenty of
Yes.
resources, or we're always looking for
Yes.
resources that can help. So your school could also be a help to those homeschoolers and bridge that gap as well.
Yeah, that's so great. Okay, well, if our listeners want to learn more about you and your school and your church, or help with funding, financing this amazing ministry and the mission field you have happening there in Kentucky, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. Okay. So easiest ways would be first thing to do would be the website. So the website is saltandlightbaptist.org/school. And you go to saltandlightbaptist.org/school, and then you can see all about the school, our curriculum, ways to give. So you can learn more about it there. And then you can also keep up with what's happening on Facebook. We have First Principles Academy on Facebook. So you can just look up the First Principles Academy, and then we're posting on there pretty regularly as well. So trying to keep people updated there. So Facebook and the
Great.
website.
Okay. Thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate everything. Thanks for your time. You're a busy man, and blessings in your ministry.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. And thank you for our listeners tuning in. We'll see you next time for another episode of Wise and Otherwise.